All right, good evening and welcome to lecture number 20 for MT225. Tonight's reasonably short class since we're just open for questions regarding structural analysis. So we have our second exam Wednesday night. So we'll be going through some of the administrative details, and I'll remind everyone of the content for exam two, maybe go over some quick tips and tricks, things to keep in mind. But since we don't have any active questions pending, I'm not going to work through anything. If you see this video later on and want to see some questions worked through, I'd encourage you to look through the content from last spring. There's plenty of that out there on the YouTube channel, so you should be able to find something that would be pretty close to what you're looking for some extra help. So let's see here. Tonight, homework 8 is due on Wednesday night. That is a bonus assignment. It's only 2 problems on frames. So, not a bad idea to get that done and turned in. It'll help you study for the exam, and it will count against your lowest homework grade. So, not a bad idea to turn it in, especially if frames were fairly easy for you. Homework 7 I returned over the weekend, and you should have gotten a copy of that back with your feedback. About the only real concern I had show up in there, people are missing some moments in doing their external problems, which definitely causes some issues. And make sure to read the questions carefully. Usually, I'm not big on tying you down to one particular method or another, and all of these problems can be solved by method of joints or method of sections. But generally, but I also have to be able to assess your ability to use the different methods. So you got to be careful with some of the problems as they'll show up on the exam and as they are in the sample exam. If it says to use a specific method, you don't get any credit if you use a different method to solve it. So normally I don't like doing that kind of thing, but to meet the objectives of this class, I have to have definitive assessment of your skills in applying both of those methods, method of joints and method of sections. And we ran into a couple problems with that on the homework assignment. Quiz 6 is out there due tonight. I've already gotten submissions from that from several people, and I will try my best to get that back to you prior to the exam. Probably get it back tomorrow night. And finally, exam number 2 is on Wednesday night at 5 p.m. at the hangar. Since I'm teaching back at the hangar now during the day, I may have to leave briefly to go pick up the pizza, but I'll go and grab the food. Should be back by 5, so you'll have some nourishment to sustain you through the ordeal of our exam. Um, Remember, you can have up to 2 4-inch by 6-inch index cards for reference. You can put anything you want on those as long as you don't add extra dimensions. You can't put little flaps and things like that on there to try to gain extra space. 4-inch by 6-inch, both sides. It's about all you can use. You can print it as small as you want. On it, sample problems, whatever you need. So bear that in mind. 2 of those, you can reuse one of them from your first exam. You can write up 2 new ones. Doesn't really make much of a difference. And our sample exam 2 has been posted. That's been up for a while. I made sure the solutions are up there so you can check those out as well. And I do encourage you to look through the solutions, especially if you're struggling with this. It gives you a pretty good overview. It's exactly the same as how I'd solve it in person. I wrote those solutions up by how I would do the problem. So you get a good overview of how to approach it. So let's see. Homework questions. Typically, homework on this one, the homework 8, the table problem is a common source of questions. I would encourage you to use some symmetry there. That'll help you to get some idea, at least whether or not your external problem's right. And then, like I said, when analyzing a frame, You really don't want to deal with analyzing slanted members if you can avoid it. With that particular problem, I think, you have to use one of them. So you're going to have to use one side or the other, but I would go for the external problem first, then the tabletop, then one of the legs. And that would get you everything you need. So exam 2, let's go over to take a look at what exam 2 looks like. At least this is the one from April of 2018, so a few years ago, a little bit after our current exam here. We're running on a different schedule that year. Let's see. So this is the one that's been posted for the last week or so. And I'm just going to take a quick spin through this to give you some hints, some things to pay attention to, some things to be careful of in solving these kinds of problems. I won't work through the solutions. I'll just point you to the solutions that are already online on that. But just some quick tips and tricks. One, so here we have a method of joints problem. We really can't do it as anything else, because if you try to do method of sections on this, no matter what section you take, you basically end up isolating just one joint. Watch your angles. I've seen a few errors coming up with people doing adjacent over opposite for their angles. They're getting the complement of the angle that they need, or generally making angle errors. So make sure you're careful about your angles. Watch your dimensions. Watch out for these horizontal forces. For some reason, the horizontal forces tend to get missed more often than the vertical ones. And both horizontal and vertical forces can create moments depending on where your pivot point is. So be careful of that. If you miss that 57 pounds, you're going to miss some moment in this problem. You're going to get the wrong values for your reactions at A and C, and you're basically hosed from the beginning. You're not going to be able to get the right answers out of that. So pay very close attention to that external problem. Make sure your answers make sense. Make sure they're reasonable before you start going into the joints. Biggest problem beyond just being able to do the mathematics for method of joints is getting that tension versus compression thing down. Remember that when we draw the free body diagram of a joint, we are looking at the force the joint feels due to the member. So a member in tension will tend to pull the joints that it's connected to together, while a member in compression will tend to push the joints apart. And I've given you several tools to use to try to figure out whether a member is in tension or compression. And those would be something I definitely want to have on my sheet, on my index cards, if I wasn't feeling 100% confident with that. But otherwise, method of joints, watch your sig figs. The problems here state your answers to 3 sig figs. So you want to carry 5 throughout the problem. Make sure that when you state your loads, if you get answers that are negative, that only affects the direction. The load is always a positive number. So that'll affect your interpretation of tension or compression, but you should never have a negative load there. Let's jump over to problem number 2. Problem number 2 is a method of sections problem. Don't get thrown by the fact that the supports here are on different levels. You can assume both of these are on horizontals. So a little bit of a strange kind of structure on one end, but not impossible. Maybe you have a river you're trying to span, and one bank is a little bit lower than what you've got on the other side. Maybe there's an outcropping or something over here, and you can support on top of that. So definitely something we can analyze. And like I've mentioned before, I like to put problems in that look different than what you've solved before. But when you really think about them, if you understand the ideas and the concepts, you should be able to analyze them with no problem. So they look a little bit different. Don't get thrown by that. Again, sig figs. So 3 sig figs here. So 5 in your finals. Other than that, let's see, what do they want? They want CD, CG, and GH or HG. So that's right down here through the middle. Make a decision about closing to the left or to the right based on how much work is involved. Most of these are pretty straightforward problems, but sometimes it's a little simpler to close one way or another. Like if I close to the left, I'm only going to have to deal with one other force, this reaction at A. If I close to the right, I'll have to deal with three external forces. I'll have to deal with this 15 and the 5, but then also the reaction at G. So 2 forces versus 3, maybe a little bit easier to deal with in the equations, but it usually isn't by much. And then remember, for tension and compression, in a method of sections problem, the way we draw the free body diagram, we're always assuming tension. So if we get a positive answer, we can check the box that's tension. Make sure you're clear on which box is tension. Be careful, it might flip around, or you might have tension on one side, compression on the other if a table is drawn for you. If you think that might throw you, don't use this table. Write out another one or copy it down with the order you like. I have seen people do that where they calculated it, even stated it was tension, but checked the compression box because they were always used to tension being first. But you can't control what somebody gives you as a table if you have to fill it in. So be careful with that. And then we've got a third problem here that is a frame problem. So frame problem, got a little crane, similar to one that I worked out as an example problem. Don't get thrown by the fact that pi feet is labeled in here. We end up not actually needing that for anything. But here you've got 3 internal joints, C, D, and E. So you've got 6 unknowns there, plus you've got 3 unknowns from the reactions at A and the reaction at B. So a total of 9 unknowns. You're going to need to do 3 setups. I would do the external problem. That'll actually get me numbers at A and B, since there are only 3 unknowns for the external problem. 3 equations, 3 unknowns, you'll get numbers. Then I would probably work the horizontal member and then the vertical member. I'd leave member DE alone. Just slanted members, you have problems when you pick pivot points and all that. And then remember here, watch your magnitudes. You may get different signs in the X and Y columns compared to what maybe even I have in my solutions. That's okay here. The signs depend on your assumptions, not on anything necessarily physical. The magnitudes are physical, so those should exactly match. Be careful when finding your magnitudes. Don't rely on your calculator to always do the right thing when you hit that squared button. On some calculators, if you have a negative number and you just hit ℏ2, it's going to give you a negative number back because it sees negative of some number squared, not the quantity negative number squared. Other calculators would be fine at it. So be careful there. If you end up getting a negative after you square something, that should be a big red flag. Something's wrong. The magnitude should always be bigger than either of the 2 values that went to build it. It's the hypotenuse of a right triangle. So it's always got to be the longest side. If you get something that's shorter or the same length, other than say something like B where you only have 1 force, then something's definitely wrong there. That's all that showed up on this one. I have variations that I've used in the past that have 3 questions, some have 4, some mix things together, some are kind of straightforward. Most are straightforward like this. So as far as what you might expect to see, you can certainly expect a method of joints problem and a method of sections problem. There may be a problem where you'll have a choice where you can decide whether to do method of joints or method of sections. And then there's likely to be a frame problem. So those are the that's what we should expect for our exam. So next time, exam 2, Hanger, 5 p.m. Have a good evening.